Jared Day from Spooled Magazine. I just want to run through some of the rigs required in targeting snapper in both Port Phillip and also in Western Port. So firstly, I'll just start with the rods and reels because it does differ greatly when fishing either of those two waterways. For Port Phillip Bay, it's always about light tackle, mainly due to the lack of current that is in the northern end part of the bay. So in that instance, a 6 to 8 kilo live fibre fishing rod. This has got a lot of strength in the butt section, but also quite a nice sensitive tip, obviously, to notice those bites. I'm only running a 4000 size reel here. This is the Shimano Thunus 4000. It's got the bait runner feature, so for snapper, obviously, they pick up the bait and they can freely run with the actual bait before setting the hooks. The line just comes off super smooth. I've got 6 kilo monofilament. I don't like to run braid in Port Phillip because it floats. Obviously in those situations it takes the bait a lot longer to get to the bottom. Though this can be good sometimes, it also can inhibit actual bite detection, whereas the mono is a little bit heavier, so it does sink better with the bait. On the end of that, I've then got my bite leader. In this case, this is 30-pound nylon. However, you can fish a little bit heavier if you like. I wouldn't go any heavier than 50 pound though, because you just do not need to. So 30, 40 or 50 is more than enough. The rig setup, again, very simple. Due to the lack of current in the northern parts of Port Phillip, I just run a size 1 ball sinker freely up and down the actual main line. A crane swivel to prevent line twist, and down to my leader I've got a snelled set of 5/0 suicide hooks. Now this is a really good setup for if you're fishing baits like whole squid, whole pilchards, whole silver whiting, whole garfish. Alternatively, you can just fish smaller baits too, like a calamari ring. Obviously it can just be pinned on one of the hooks and the other one can just sit in the other side of it. Alternatively, you can always use a single circle hook, something like this Mustard Demon Light Circle. You don't need to have really big hooks, for instance, or thick gauge hooks. Nice fine wire hooks are definitely worthwhile, and they do pin the fish a lot better as well. So this hook setup is ideal when targeting Port Phillip snapper, and it's very simple, obviously, to make up. Now Western Port, on the other hand, a little bit different. A little bit different in the fact that you're combating quite strong current. Now I know that a lot of the time everybody says, oh, the best bite time is 2 hours either side of the tide change. That is right, but the main reason that is right is because it's always difficult to get sinkers and baits down to the bottom when the current's running extremely hard. So that 2 hours either side of the tide, where the tide is slowing up or it's starting to speed up, is the perfect time, because your baits do get to the sea floor where the snapper are. So with that, and the fact that in Western Port there's also a lot of sharks and gummy sharks, stingrays, all the unwanted fish that you tend to catch when you are targeting snapper, you do need to fish a little bit heavier. So in this case I've got like an 8 to 12 kilo Wilson Venom rod. This is fantastic, can handle heavy sinkers up to 20 ounces if I needed to use that just to combat the current. A small overhead size reel running 50-pound braid. Then I have a 60-pound leader, which is probably about 2 meters long, and then I have a bite leader which is 80-pound, and that's just to prevent any bite offs from other species. But on my 60-pound I have an easy rig running sinker clip, and this here, in which case I would generally tie a 30 centimeter length of 8-pound mono with a loop in the end, and my sinker goes on that. So my sinker is actually on a dropper, so that should it get snagged into the reef or into the mud and it's very difficult to get out and I might snap off, rather than snapping off the whole rig, I snap off my sinker only, and then I just have to retie another dropper, another sinker, and I'm back in the action without having to retie the entire rig. Then I have a crane swivel. A crane swivel prevents a lot of line twist, so I probably wouldn't go down the path of using like a cheap brass swivel, because your line twist will be crazy fishing in high current areas. Definitely the crane swivel will eliminate that. And like I said, probably about a metre length of 80-pound. And in this case in Western Port, I always like to fish just a single circle. I find this is probably the best way to get a hook up. Mainly with the current, you've got so much line out when a fish actually takes a bait, quite often it'll grab it and then spit it out again, or try and turn and run off with the bait. Not always do you see the bite, nor do you always, when you strike, be able to take up all that slack line to actually get the hooks from pinning. This is where a circle hook does all the work for you. So all you have to do is leave the rod in the rod holder and the fish will hook itself. As soon as it grabs it, it turns and it rotates and pins. So this is a really good setup for fishing whole calamari, hoods of calamari, rings of calamari, but then again you can fish pilchards, fish heads, frames, all sorts of things still on this hook. You just don't need to cover the hook with the bait. It just needs to be pinned on just gently. So this can also be used in Port Phillip, probably more in the southern end of Port Phillip, not necessarily up where there's very few current, but without a doubt those two setups unquestionably can do all Port Phillip and all Western Port snapper without hesitation.